If it were happy birthday to you. If it were happy birthday, if it were you.
Happy birthday, BASW.
Penblwydd hapus BASW. Happy birthday, BASW.
Happy 50th birthday, BASW.
Happy birthday, BASW.
Happy 50th anniversary, BASW.
Happy birthday, BASW.
Hi, hello. It's Kusakapusi here, and I want to celebrate with you. British Association of Social Workers. It's your 50th birthday and 100 years of doing phenomenal social work. The reason I want to get involved and celebrate your success and celebrate your birthday is because I have had the good fortune of having some phenomenal social workers. I joined a children's home in 1966. I was 8 years of age, and my social worker was integral to my transition, my sense of self and well-being, all the way till I joined the army in 1975. So I do understand the good work that you do and how important you are to young people up and down the country who are trying to make their way in life. Keep up the good work. All right, happy birthday to ya.
Alert, BASW UK has stopped screen share Zoom webinar.
Croeso, Falcha, welcome to the festival celebrating the 50 years of the British Association of Social Workers. My name's Joey Nosowska, and I'm fortunate enough to be the current chair of BASW UK. I want to open the festival by talking a little bit about courage. Social workers have lots of roles, and one thing we all need is courage. We need to find courage ourselves, and we need to encourage others. I think that's how we're helpful and how we enable people to transform lives. Courage and encouragement both come from the word core, meaning heart. And I think social work takes a lot of heart. It's a heart activity first, and the head, hands, and feet follow. BASW is full of heart. A colleague of mine on council says that BASW should stand for brave, authentic social work, full of courage and full of heart. And I think that's why BASW's been here for 50 years and why we'll keep needing the British Association of Social Workers. We need that heart to keep going and to recognise the best of what we do, to face up to the worst, and also to transform ourselves. So as we start this festival, I want to remember the people who've given us courage, who've been our role models, who've given us a legacy, the people who give us heart now, who encourage us and challenge us and help us to stay on the right path. And I want to take a moment to remember the people that we've lost, professionally, personally, and as a society, particularly now. And I want to look forward to the people who'll keep having courage and who'll keep the heart of the profession and the association beating for the future. Let's remember and let's celebrate the past, present, and future of social work. Happy birthday, BASW. I'm really delighted to open the festival with our first session on protecting rights, helping people flourish. Is this social work yet? I need to do a little bit of housekeeping to start with. Firstly, I really hope there's no technical difficulties. If there are, then our amazing staff team behind the scenes will get onto them straight away. I also need to let you know that we're recording this session, and also that every one of us who's talking over the next few days will be speaking for ourselves. First of all, we'll be giving our own views unless we explicitly state that it's something that BASW's position is. So I really look forward to a lively and inclusive discussion. If you are not familiar with Zoom, you can click on Gallery View to see all of us, including the panelists who haven't yet appeared on your screen. And you can also click on speaker view if you want to just see the person who's speaking at that point in time. So I'm going to start by introducing Catrice Horsley. Catrice is a storyteller and she will be weaving stories throughout our festival. Catrice.
Thank you very much, and happy birthday, BASW. I'm so pleased that I know it's BASW, not BASW. It's a difficult one. When Jerry was saying that I'm going to be weaving stories, essentially I'm going to be pulling up the threads that are going to occur when people are speaking and sharing their views on social work, past, present, and future. And I know that perhaps in the past, we told people the stories that we thought they needed to hear. And perhaps in the past, we created the stories for them that we thought they needed to hear. And I think that now we are more about enabling people to find their own voice and to tell their own stories. Because the big question tends to be, who is telling your story? And in what way are they telling it? So over the next 2 days, we have the voices of people who are heavily involved in social work, who are social workers themselves, who represent social workers, who have been part of the care system, and we are hearing those authentic voices. So I'm going to be pulling those up, weaving them together, but I want you to be part of that as well. At the bottom of your screen, you will see there is a chat box. And if you think there are any stories that aren't being told, themes that you think aren't being pulled up, I'd love you to mention those in the chat box. And to the right of your chat box, there is a question and answers box. And this is specifically if you have specific questions for the people who are speaking, for the sessions and for the hosts and the panel. And we will try and answer those questions. If we have too many, we might not be able to answer every single one, but we will really endeavour to answer as many as we can. So that's my role. I'm in Sweden. I'm a Brummie born and bred. And in Sweden, they have a phrase about the red thread. What is the red thread that is stitching all of this together? I'm hoping that I'm holding the needle in order to pull these threads together from one session to another, so that together we can weave a fabric of meaning from all of the information and the experiences that we will share over the next 2 days. So I'm looking forward to it. And back to you, Jerry.
Thanks so much, Catrice. And now I have the absolute pleasure of introducing our special guest for this session, Lems Say. Lems is an author, broadcaster, poet, truth teller, and much more. And he's written about his early life and his experiences of social work and the care system in My Name Is Why. And as we look back and forward, I'm really thankful that we'll have this opportunity to hear his voice. So over to you.
Thank you. You actually share your 50th birthday with Sesame Street and the moon landing and Monty Python's Flying Circus. They're all 50 this year. And maybe at times, you know, maybe you've felt a bit like some of the characters in those various places, like Big Bird of Sesame Street, or even Bert and Ernie. Maybe you've felt at times like Manuel in Fawlty Towers. And maybe you've felt the inner elation of landing on the moon, boldly going where no person has gone before. I spent 18 years in care of a series of social workers, right the way through from 1967 to 1985. There was no break. The name I was given at birth, not the name on my birth certificate, was the name of a social worker. The first social worker in 1967 named me Norman. I think he thought that, you know, giving me an anglicised name, Norman means man of the north, that it would somehow disguise my colour from the town that I was being brought up in. Shh, if we call him Norman, nobody will know. Things have changed, you know, not least public awareness. And this is what I want to share with you about. I've not got the skills to do what you do, but I do have the opportunity to try to be a part of the change in public awareness of the child in care and social services and the role of social workers. You know, pushing public consciousness is not easy because I see how much you do and how far we have come, but I don't see that as reflected in the public consciousness as much as it should be. I support you. It's a long journey to say that from 18 years in care, and I do. I am one person, but that's one more than before, and each one teach one. Family is like family outside of the care system. Family is a set of disputed memories between one group of people over a lifetime. Stay with me. Family is about separations and reconciliations, storms of dispute, and the calm and quiet of the hug. Both of those things, both of those binaries. If I were to ask you to voice, stay with me on this. If I were to ask you, please, if I were to ask you to voice the betrayal in your own family, the one betrayal, you know, was it a sister who you felt like who was the favourite and you weren't? Was it a father who you felt never spoke to you properly? Directly, if I was asking you to bring up that thing that you said, I'm going to be independent of this, right? If I were to ask you to bring up that one thing, the thing that comes to mind, if I were to ask each you to say that, to out it, to out that thing. This is why Christmas dinners are very difficult, by the way. If I were to ask you to out that to the person who did it, and then I was to ask every single member of your family to do the same thing, because, by the way, everybody else has got a feeling of betrayal from one person or another in the family. If I were to ask them all to do it in the front room, out loud, eye to eye, to the person who did it. By the way, you don't have to do this. You can carry this gripe for the rest of your life. It'll be the making of you. Anyway, I can pretty much guarantee that when that happens, that everybody says that what their betrayal was, I can pretty much guarantee that somebody will be sectioned. The police may have to be called. Truthfully, the care system is not far away from any of us. All of our families have secrets and lies and failures and truths and betrayals, abuses of trust and actions of love, all of them. Dysfunction is at the heart of all functioning, beautiful families. It's part of the nature of nature. No tree is the same. They are all gnarled with knots, but they all give out seeds. They all grow. The PR company of family promotes the idea that everything that I've said is untrue. There's nothing wrong with our family. And that is a lie. You know, family is a functioning celebration of dysfunction. Christmas dinners are the primary example, but the PR company, it won't accept it. There's nothing wrong with our family. It's the idea that we learn from school. Don't you talk bad about my mum or dad. No matter how good your mum or dad is, or how bad or bad your mum and dad is, it's the PR company of family which casts the bad eye upon the child in care, because they are living, walking proof of the truth that dysfunction is at the heart of all families. And the same with social workers. I believe that our public is down on social workers and down on social services because it doesn't want to admit the truth about family is that it is really hard work and it can fall apart at any time. And I'll tell you something else, just you can take this one. Most of the kids who are doing drugs, who are sleeping with people inappropriately, who are stealing from shops, they're not kids in care. They're your kids. All right? And when your child steals something from a shop, when your child takes drugs, because most of kids who take drugs are not kids in care, you will sit down with your partner or with yourself and improvise a way through this life-shattering problem. What you don't do is call the police. What you don't do is criminalise your own child. What I want to do is to close the gap between them and us, because we've been othered all of our lives. I want the social services to be so good that you have to have conferences on how to stop middle-class parents from putting their children into care, because it's that good. There have always been children going into the care system. It's written, there's always children being fostered. I don't think it's a bad thing. In fact, you will know, above all people, that it's a good thing when it happens, because it has to happen. I want social workers to be the highest paid civil servants, because they're looking after society's greatest asset, the child and their families. I want social workers to be skipping to work, asking for a greater caseload, because everyone out there in the public appreciates the work that they're doing in saving the generation that needs to be saved. What I know is what you know. When the pressure is on in wider society, the social services comes under pressure, and social workers too. I have always offered compassionate critique. It's really important. I had good social workers. I mean, I'll tell you about him in a minute. I mean, incredible social worker. And I had bad social workers. So what? That's what happens in family. You have people who will support you, and you have people who will not. Why should social workers, the legal representative of the guardian for the child, why should that be any different? I want the care system to be a place of refuge and development, a place of growth and pure opportunity. It's easy for me to say, isn't it, from the outside? I could not do what you do on the front line, but I can offer compassionate critique, just like any other family member who cares for the others in theirs. Social work needs a very good PR company to say, how can we make them see that you are heroes? That is, heroes. Heroes, says a social worker, says one of you sat there listening to me now thinking, I don't want to be a hero. Don't other me as a hero. I'm a worker. I'm on the front line, and I agree. You don't want to be seen as a hero. I can see that. But if the NHS can be seen as heroes because they're saving lives, then you deserve to be seen as heroes because you are saving lives. And I can honestly say that if it were not for some key decisions by a particular social worker, I wouldn't be here today. I'm not embarrassed about being in care because Moses was adopted, Harry Potter was a foster child, James Bond was fostered, Matilda was in a children's home, Jesus had 2 dads. Think about it, think about that one. Okay, I know that some of you will be thinking, oh, I don't think he should have said that. Jesus did have 2 dads. James Bond was fostered, Matilda was in children's homes. I've said that already. Being on the front line, you might think this is a simple kind of jokey connection between the care system and children in care, and it isn't. Take Harry Potter, the depression he suffered, and how he thought when he thought about his dead parents. He saw dementors. The darkness. He ran away. He spoke with an unusually adult voice to adults, inappropriately. Some would not accept it. Few did. And by the way, if Harry Potter was in care, that makes Dumbledore representative of social workers, which is very good. You know, all the examples of the care system, good and bad parenting and families, are front and center in popular culture and social workers. And so I don't see what you are doing as a hidden part of our society. I see it as central. And to this day, I believe what I've said in 2012 in the Houses of Parliament. You can see how well a government is doing by how it treats its child. I have to say that being embarrassed or not about being in the care system is a personal choice. But the shame comes from a bigger idea. The idea that being in care is a shameful situation depends on us thinking that all families are perfect except for us. Things have and are changing. That does not matter to a child who's in care right now. Okay, people are asking me, you know, have things changed? Yes, they have. But it doesn't matter to any one child who's in care now. If you were to go up to a child in care now and say it's better than it was, it means nothing. And people said that to me when I was in care. So don't, please, show the action, because it's there. The director of Leeds Children's Services becomes the chief executive of Leeds Council. Very rare. A month ago, Oxford University's launched a multi-million-pound scholarship fund, and while publicising it they mentioned that it would be good for care leavers. Last week, I had a Zoom meeting with the housing organisations from Greater Manchester responsible for 1 in 5 houses in Greater Manchester. The Lord Mayor of Manchester was present. The sole purpose of that meeting was to provide opportunities for children leaving care. You, as social workers, are no longer alone. You're no longer on your own. Through some serious work by the All Parliamentary Group for Children and Care Leavers, a few years ago, David Cameron mentioned children in care in his conference speech. That has never happened before. That the Prime Minister has mentioned the care system and young people in care in his conference speech. Never before in history. Something is happening in society that we are more aware of children in care now than we have ever been before. It's going to take a lot for them to start to turn around to see how incredibly important the work that you're doing is. But it is. And as somebody who was in care, who had his family stolen from him, my mother and father, by a social worker, who had his name changed, who was imprisoned as a child, who's found all of the proof of it, who took the government to court for what they did to me, who won that court case, who spent his career as a poet and as a writer actually making sure people understand the story. I have come out of that knowing that how important that the individual social worker is and every relationship they have with every person that they work with. And I support you 100%. Most importantly, I'm going to end now, but most importantly, what I believe social workers need is they need support of each other. You know, when you are working in toxic environments, it's very easy for that toxicity to sort of imbue us, you know, and so that we can actually act it out between ourselves. We need to be supportive of each other as social workers and in the social services so that we can help each other be the best that we can be. I think I should end there. I'm not a politician, I'm an artist and I'm a writer and I'm a creative. And I hope I've not sounded so sort of speechy. Bags of love to you. Happy birthday.
Thanks so much, Lem. That was beautifully from the heart, and thank you for that vision of how social work can be. I'm going to ask if all the panel members could turn their cameras on now, and I'm just going to introduce the people that we have joining us. So we have Lynn Romeo, who's Chief Social Worker for Adults in England, who's currently on sabbatical. We have Breege Featherstone, who's from the University of Huddersfield. Trisha Pereira, who's from the London Borough of Merton. We have Fiona MacLeod from Neathport Talbot County Council. David Gillan, who's an independent social worker from Castle Rock up in Northern Ireland, and Graham Price, who's one of our experts by experience who supports BASW England, both in the adults social work group and also in our overall involvement strategy. You're all very welcome. Having listened to what Lem Sasay has just been talking to us about, I just want to get a few people's take initially on how you think social work has changed over the last 50 years. If I could come to Trisha first and then Graham. Just need to turn your microphones on as you start.
Yeah. Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I'm really honoured to be part of this. Actually, thank you, Lem. I was blown away by your opening dialogue. Very, very powerful. How has social work changed? Do you know, social work, for me, it's a political profession. It's rooted in politics. I mean, how can it not be? When you think back I'm taking you right back now, when you think back to the Prime Minister, Clement Attlee, he became Prime Minister during World War II, after World War II. Not many people know he was a social worker. Wow. He was a social worker, yeah, he was a social worker, and he volunteered before becoming a social worker. He was a social work lecturer. He lectured from 1914 to 1918, and he published a book entitled Social Work in 1920. And that book outlines his idea of social services. And it brought together what we now know are the 4 essential elements of social work. And that's social work to be radical, to be relationship-based, to be realistic, to be I can never say that word. Help me out, somebody.
Reciprocal.
Reciprocal. And that is still valid today, is it not? He ended the Poor Law, he created the NHS and the National Insurance Act. He volunteered in the community. That is the heart of social work. We are a profession that champions civil rights. Over the years, we are. And if you think back to what's happening in America now, if I go back again, Roosevelt, who was the president, who surrounded himself by a team of social workers, they put together a whole program in a time of austerity, the Great Depression. They put together a program to put people back into employment, to support people in work. So at that time, we had 2 leaders across the pond who surrounded themselves with social workers. And it just makes me reflect now that we are in this time, we have 2 leaders across either side of the pond who, to me, seem to distance themselves from social workers. We are a powerful profession. We uphold the rights and we stand side by side with people. And we shouldn't be ashamed of that. We should be brave and we should do this. As Lemon said, the government are recognising the contributions that we are making. We need to ride this wave of hope and just keep on going. It's been 50 years. It's been a roller coaster for 50 years. But if they started it in 1920 and 1930s, and look what the governments had around them, social workers. And that's what the governments need around them now.
Thank you so much, Trisha. Can I come over to you, Graham, now to get your take on how things have been over more than 50 years?
I've got to say help following those 2 speakers, except for we've only got to listen to Lord Peter Hennessy, the historian constitutionalist, who really is very hopeful. He's very positive. He thinks that we're in a period where we are going to see the Claim Attlee attitude prevail, where there is an attitude that will begin to see social workers, or that the benefit of a more informed and cooperative government and people that begins to give us the real change that we saw from the Claim Attlee government. As Jerry has sort of indicated, I'm a bit more than the 50-year here. I'm an 80-year-old, but and I'm very jealous of Lem having 18 years in care. I only got 16 years, and I entered almost from the day of birth. So I was thrown out at 16. He got 18, so he did better than me. But in truth, of course, what he proves, and indeed what I can prove, is that you can succeed if you're determined to do so. And that's not to say everybody's got that ability, but one of the values social workers have is that they give people that level of hope. If the right hand is reaching out to them. And I was very interested in his attitude towards the family meeting and the dysfunctionality of families, because I was brought up in care, and I must confess, one of my great sort of the betrayal I felt to me was no one took an ounce of interest in my education, not one jot of interest. And that's, you know, to some extent, well, it certainly was a big barrier for me for many, many years, but eventually you get over it because you have to make your life. But my experience of social work was, as a youngster, terrible. I was fostered with a view to adoption. The social worker was not good. I have to be careful though when I make those sort of comments or criticisms, because everything is evolving. At one point, I have to be honest, I suspect the social worker then was working on the basis of what they thought was the right thing to do. In my view, it wasn't the right thing to do. And but of course, when I then became a blind person, I had a social worker again for a while. And that again was a very poor experience. It was an untrained person. And then when my wife, my late wife now, became seriously unwell with Parkinson's and attendant dementia, I had a fantastically good social worker, absolutely fantastic. So things have moved on, and that was in 2008, 2010. So things have moved on. But if I speak a little bit about my own engagement with social work, I became a member of the British Association of Social Work, not a member, sorry, I joined them in 2017, in fact. They asked for people with lived experience or carers to apply to become part of their subgroups, and I joined the adult. It's become the adult subgroup of the English. It was only pioneered initially by the English management group of BASW, and I found that experience to be fantastic. There's not the ounce of tokenism in it. You are there as a person with lived experience, an expert by experience. You can comment, as we do, to any reports that are sent out or we discuss, and you're valued as an equal in those discussions, and that's been fantastic. They're really, really helpful there. And I've been impressed with the level of care taken. The first thing we developed, a subgroup was developed, which looked at the local government association's green paper on care. It was partly to embarrass the government, who keeps talking about a green paper on social care and doesn't produce it. But that was absolutely excellent. The experience was fantastic. And then, you know, so my computer keeps telling me who's coming and going, and it's a bit distracting. But never mind. And more recently, looking at the Care Act and the easements that some local authorities are engaging with or taking on board, and the care they take to make sure that they get the voice of the social worker and what experience they're having in this regard has been really, really fantastic. So I'd like to end by saying, you know, the few points here is, are the rights being protected? Are we enabling people through social work to flourish? And are we at social work yet? Those are the three aims of this talk. And I think there's very positive statements or comments to be made on each of those three elements. And thank you very much for listening to me.
Thanks so much, Graham, and that's great that you've really highlighted about rights, which is what I would like to go on to talk a little bit about now. If I could come over to Lynn, first of all, from an adult's perspective around how the law and policy around rights has changed over the last 50 years and where you think we're at the moment.
Great, thanks for inviting me to be here, and it's been very inspiring to listen to everybody so far. I guess that's it, isn't it? What is the motivation and justification for social work? And the overriding principles are about rights, respect for the inherent worth and dignity of each person, doing no harm, respect for diversity, and I think that's one of the things that has characterized social work over the 50 years. And it's all about upholding people's human rights and striving for social justice. That is the basis of why we do social work. And I guess the 50 years thing is interesting because it coincides with the CBOM changes within the UK around creating social services departments, which did put social work values and ethics at the heart of statutory practice. It created departments which were obliged to provide community-based and family-focused services which would be available for all, and to connect people with their communities and to look to the strengths of communities and to move away from what had become a very medicalized approach to hospital institutional approaches to often warehousing people, particularly for adults, people with learning disabilities, older, frail people, people with learning disabilities, and so on. And so there was a big shift, and that was probably the golden age, and it didn't last as long as it should have done, where we really were concerned with about people having citizenship outcomes and a rights to inclusive, respectful lives where they could really have the lives that they wanted, have a home, have security, have the support and encouragement to live to their full potential. And that went on then to have social workers very involved in moving people out of big institutions, the closure of the big learning disability care hospitals that have been around for a long time, to trying to integrate and support people back into communities, and equally trying to support older people and people with mental health issues as well. I think we had a bit of a hiccup when we had the NHS and Community Care Act, which commodified care and got us into this kind of social care and mixed economy of care, and tended to focus on volume and cost and a supermarket approach to how you might support people. But I think with the Mental Capacity Act and the Care Act, it's reframed and reclaimed what is at the heart of social work, the values of each individual, of addressing people's uniqueness, their diversity, and ways in which what matters to them, what strengths they have, and the way in which we can connect people to their communities and to the gifts and the things that they want for themselves, so that they can really have the best possible lives. I think that's given us a whole new reframing and reclaiming of social work. So we've got a long, long way to go. I think the COVID challenge that we're all in now represents a real challenge to, well, what are the rights of older people actually? And how have those rights been trammeled on through the way in which we've handled the present situation. And also the whole debate now about Black Lives Matters, and how much has social work really addressed issues around race and ethnicity and cultural diversity, and really supported people to be the best that they can be. I'll hand back to you now, Jerry. I think I've said enough.
Thank you so much, Lynn. And I'd like to come over to Breege next to talk a little bit more about the children's view. I just want to mention a couple of things from comments as well. One of the things is, of course, how we can learn from different parts of the United Kingdom. And we've just been reminded in the chat that the First Minister in Wales is a social worker, which is absolutely wonderful. We've also had various comments around the need for positive reframings of social work generally. So I think what I'd hope is, Breege, you'd be able to touch a little bit on how children's services could be seen as more helpful and hopeful and positive.
Thanks, Jerry. It's a real pleasure to be here. And even though I'm absolutely terrified by the technology failing, I really, really am enjoying listening to everyone. Birthdays are funny things, aren't they, in the lives of us as individuals? Certainly when you get to my age, there's a lot to reflect upon. But there is also always, I think, some hope. And I want to start with a writer that has influenced me quite a bit. She's a Bulgarian writer called Maria Popova. And she argues that critical thinking without hope is cynicism, but hope without critical thinking is naivety. And I've been trying to manage that duality in thinking about social work with children and families, both in terms of the past and the present and the future. So if we think about the past, as people have already said, it was extraordinarily full of ambiguity. Children weren't heard, children received really abusive experiences, but there was always people who made a difference. There was always somebody who opened up possibilities. My own view is that, again, it's the issue about hope and its erosion, that there was a great deal of hope, and there continues to be a great deal of hope in the legislative framework that we have for children. And that's the Children Act 1989, which itself is over 30 years old now. That's a great piece of legislation. It is very expansionist. It talks about family support. It talks about protecting children from significant harm. And it talks about them both being equally important. And so section 17 is as statutory as section 47. But tragically, and this is the bit where I have to bring in my critical thinking, the hope of the Children Act was eroded quite quickly by, as we're still familiar with, cuts, poverty, with the fact that it was never properly resourced. And so if we think about our past, we have come a long way in terms of understanding the importance of particularly children's rights to voice, to agency. But we have really struggled to manage, and this became really obvious when I did, with Anna Gupta, we did the adoption inquiry, which BASW commissioned in 2016. A very important piece of work, and if you haven't read it, we encourage you to read it. Still on the BASW website. And we looked at how social work in children and families, particularly in the area of adoption, engaged with human rights issues. And what we found actually was that we're not as developed in that area as we would hope to be. And that whilst we have a good understanding of children to some extent in terms of their rights, maybe we're less understanding of children's rights to be part of families, to be part of communities, and of the importance of us pushing and pulling and telling the government the importance of ensuring that the human rights of all families to live well, to care safely, to have enough to eat, to have good housing, that they're not always protected in the way that we would hope. So currently, I think we're in a I'll talk about the pandemic in a minute, but in the last few years, since 2010, we've had great investment in more practice issues and relationship-based practice. And there's been a flowering of interest in what social workers do when they go out to visit families, how they engage children, how they talk to parents. And that's been really, really valuable. However, at the same time, and it's really come home to roost now in the pandemic, we have had an extended period of austerity and an erosion of the kind of supports, the family supports that children and their parents and their grandparents and their communities need. The pandemic for me is a game changer. There is no inevitability about a progressive future, but it has to be fought for, and it has to be fought for in alliance with Black and minority ethnic populations and with all those who struggle with the injustices we see around us. But I do think it does open up huge possibilities for us. We're seeing exposed a kind of social settlement that was often very selfish, that was very much about you got on with it on your own and you sunk or you swum. That was, if you like, very individualistic. And now we're realizing through the pandemic how absolutely connected we are with each other, from at every level in our society, and in terms also of our very fragile earth. We have to work together. We have to support each other. We have to support those who care. So I'm actually feeling cautiously optimistic, but I think, again, going back to Maria Popova and indeed the wonderful Rebecca Solnit, everything is not going to get better unless we fight. And I would say there are three things that we have to fight for: rights, recognition, and redistribution. And they come from Nancy Fraser. Our right to voice, our right to be heard, recognition of our humanity, recognition of the shame and the hurt and the pain that goes from not being heard. And finally, crucially, we have to redistribute our resources so that we all have enough to live on. We all need decent housing. We all need access to decent health. So I do think BASW has been very central to tackling poverty, to thinking about the ethics of adoption, to really thinking about a human rights approach. And I do have hope, but we have to keep fighting. So thanks, Jerry. I hope that was okay.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Thanks so much, Breed. Can I come over to you in Northern Ireland, David? Because you also have lots of experience and perspective around children's services. Again, how we can support social work to be seen as helpful and upholding rights.
Absolutely. And can I just say that our previous Justice Minister in our Parliament would be a social worker, Mr. David Ford. In fact, he was a team leader of mine some years ago. I suppose I was going to talk a bit about privatisation of children's homes and perhaps my concerns about that and maybe how systems have changed over the years. But I'm not going to do that because we keep beating ourselves up. Liam has inspired me to talk a bit about sharing my experience. I suppose, like Liam, I would have been a child in care in the mid-60s, but I wasn't placed in foster care. I was placed in residential care, and my experience was actually very poor. And I distrusted all social workers and had no time for residential social workers, or they weren't called it yet, or social workers, until I was 16, when I met my final social worker, who remained with me until I was 18. She got me. She thought I had potential. She encouraged me to, I had no education, to go back to college and get a formal education. Did a reference for me when I applied to become a social worker at age 22. And we've remained in touch for almost 50 years. We still exchange Christmas cards. She'd have come to my wedding. She'd have come to my children's christening. I suppose that's the first social worker who inspired me. But it wasn't the only one, because I think our experiences can be lifelong. And I have also met some fantastic social workers and some poor social workers. But I'm proud to say that I became a social worker and remain one, albeit I'm independent. And the social workers who continue to inspire me, or those people, sorry, who continue to inspire me throughout my career, in the main were social workers. Social workers, I think my take on social work is about connections and relationships. And I think that we can apply all the systems in the world that we want. We can apply the legislation. We can apply best practice. We can talk about competence. But if you can't connect with people and establish relationships with them, then I think that you're not been effective. I suppose I've used my experience and continue to use it. Unfortunately, I would have been abused in care, and I did present at our historical distribution abuse inquiry. The people apart from my family who supported me through that were my social work managers. I was very fortunate to work for a fantastic organisation who have not only promoted me and encouraged me, but helped me when I had my difficulty, because trauma is not a temporary thing. Trauma could be lifelong. And I did experience trauma as a senior social work manager, and my senior team were exceptionally good in terms of supporting me through that. So I suppose, to all intents and purposes, it's my substitute family. And I see so many young people now who have been inspired to become social workers. If I could share with you, one of the greatest joys I have is that I did retire from statutory social work to become an independent. And one of the people who attended that would have been a young adult who had commenced her social work training, who had been a child in care that I would have had responsibility for. And that's what makes it all worthwhile. She also invited me to her graduation and is currently a social worker. So I kind of felt that rather than me criticize systems or say what more we need to change, I think that we need to be careful not to use a humanistic approach, not to forget that social work isn't virtual, that it's about people, by people, and it's only people who are going to make the impacts on others like me. Back to you, Jerry. By the way, just before I go, that wasn't rehearsed, that was just because Liam inspired me. Sorry.
Thanks, and your comments are coming in about how inspirational it is to hear people's experience. So thank you so much, David, for sharing that. I want to come over to Wales now, to Fiona MacLeod. And I know you've got a lot of experience and interest in parent advocacy. So just wondered if you could say a bit about how we can help the work that we do be more rights and relationship focused and less adversarial, maybe.
Thank you, yes, and thanks very much. I've really appreciated the contributions from everybody, including your starting point of courage and encouragement, which I think is really essential in social work, and I think it is really where people come from. It's the reason that people enter social work in the first instance, and it is interesting to think back over the period of a sort of 50-year span. And the changes that have occurred over that time, both in terms of legislation and policy and practice, but also as for myself as a social worker, starting out as a young social worker and becoming an older social worker, my perspectives have perhaps also sort of changed somewhat. I guess some of the points that we made earlier in terms of Breed was talking about sort of the changes that have occurred at a kind of governmental level, and also there have been issues around kind of practice from I recall the establishment of the Children Act 1989 and what an enormous piece of legislation that was intended to be. And in fact, actually, it did make a critical impact as a practitioner on the ground for myself at that time. We talk about particularly partnership with children and families, and about the emphasis on the child's voice. I guess one of the things over more recent years for myself, which has become particularly important, has been the aspect of, maybe it's a human rights perspective, but it's about the need for children's voices to be heard, but also for the needs for parents' voices to be heard. And a sense, as particularly as a child protection chairperson, as a looked after children's reviewing officer, the need really for people to be supported, so as that parents in certain situations where kind of critical decisions are made aren't so alone in the process. You will find quite often in a child protection conference that the representatives from multi-agency perspectives, and they all kind of have a sense of a force about them. There's a sense of them being a body, and there's a sense of parents as being individuals amongst this force, really. And really, for myself, that kind of brought about this idea of the idea of having support, a parent being supported by another parent who's been through the experience. Because I don't think there's anything quite like having the support of somebody who's walked in your shoes. I know that everyone has kind of individual experiences to a large degree, but also we can draw upon people who have had similar experiences. And so really the idea around parent advocacy sort of took root in my mind. And from there, I was able to learn about the work, for instance, of New York in the States with David Tobis, also the work, for instance, of Reed in terms of the way that we can take a child protection approach towards families, where perhaps a more family support orientated approach might be more realistic and reasonable. And from the work of Andy Bilson, who has done phenomenal work, actually, obviously at a national level, but also at a local level with Naoise Talbot. And so more recently, we've been looking at the potential for developing parent advocacy within the local authority. And also the possibility of developing a sort of Wales-wide parent advocacy. I appreciate that Scotland has learned the lessons from the States, and Scotland has a parent advocacy and rights network which looks to support parents where children are subject to child protection procedures in the court processes, and also in terms of reunification. And we can see that in fact actually parent advocacy has got an awful lot of power, potential and power to help families in a way that receiving services doesn't. In the context of Wales, we've had some great developments in terms of the Social Services and Wellbeing Act, for instance, which is really around citizenising people. It's about really seeing people, and I think reference was made earlier to what it is that people want. What outcomes do they want for themselves? And we appreciate then that really if a person themselves reaches their own conclusions, those conclusions are more likely to be implemented than ones that are kind of coerced or forced through some of the systems that they apply. So really, I think that's the next step really for myself, certainly. It's a step. From our local authority perspective, it's the next step. And I would like for that to be a next step for Wales, so that in fact we have parents who are supported by parent advocates going through critical sort of decision-making junctures in their child's life. We can see that in fact the outcomes of that are a lot better for children and for families. Children remain with their families more often. Swifter plans tend to be made, things that stick, and also permanency within the family is more of a realistic option for children. I think that is especially important when we look at the more recent developments around that Andy Bilson has kind of commented on, around children who are born into care, and the very high levels of children born into the care system, which have doubled, I think, over the years since 2011. And although child protection investigations and child protection conferences have lessened over the period, we can also see that actually so have removals, so have adoptions, and so forth. So in fact, we might, there is a criticism that can be levelled, which is around we're not doing enough really, and that it's a systems failure rather than a personal or a parent or a family failure. We need to be doing more at the early sort of stages to support children within their families where possible. And where that's not possible, I agree also with comments that were made earlier. The care experience should be, it should be a gold standard experience for children. In fact, actually, it optimises for them their educational potential. That assists them, supports them, and a piece of work that I did some years ago now, when I worked previously with Swansea with young people, and a mantra almost that kind of was developed by the children at that particular point in time was that childhood should be something that you use as a resource in your adult life, not something you spend the rest of your adult life coming to terms with. So I would really like for social care to be something which is utilised really to its best possible potential. I do see phenomenal work undertaken on a regular daily basis by social workers in the profession, but I also see that there's a role now for parents to become more authentic partners in the process. And I really see that as being through parent advocacy.
Thank you so much, Fiona. That's really valuable. I love that that idea of childhood being a resource for adulthood. I'm going to just pick up on a couple of questions that have come in, which I think are really really capture some of the contextual issues that we're facing at the moment. So there's a question around the issues of privatisation and how you can provide really authentic rights-based care when some services are actually around profit. There's also a question around anti-oppressive practice and BASW, and there's a question around pushing the idea of hope and safety and helping within social work. I just want to pick up on the anti-oppressive practice thing as chair of BASW initially. So the issue that's been raised is how we can be representative of the profession when our leadership isn't visibly representative of the social work workforce, and particularly around ethnicity. We will be reporting at the annual general meeting around the Equality Act characteristics of council, and it's a little, some of it is invisible. I absolutely accept there's a visibility issue, but there is some invisible ethnic minority groupings in council, including, for example, myself. I'm half Irish and quarter Polish, but there's a question of how we make ourselves visibly representative, and we're trying to do that through co-opting people to council, through encouraging people to stand for council, and there is still time to stand as a member of council for the elections that are coming up, and also striving to mentor and encourage people to come into those leadership roles and recognise that there is really an awful lot more to do. And I think those other points around privatisation and around the way that social work is seen also do reflect just how far we have to go. So just want to pick up on that for the last 5 minutes or so of the panel discussion. And I'd really like to come to Graham, actually, just to ask you for just a very short message of what you think social work needs to do next.
Well, it certainly needs to engage more fully with people with lived experience, and it's doing that actually, but it's an ongoing process. And when we talk about is social work right yet, I mean, clearly it can never be right, because it will always be an evolving process, won't it? But I think it's making the steps, it's taking the necessary steps to really engage in that process. So, for instance, they've set up what do we call it? Anyway, start to finish group called the lived experience involvement framework. And you might be surprised to learn that there's less people with lived experience engaged in what BASW is doing today than there were a few years ago. But the whole process of this Task to Finish group now is to see how we might promote more engagement with people with lived experience. And there is a survey that's live now. I think it finishes this week, at the end of this week, which is asking for the views of social workers. How do they think what would they like to see in the next 12 months BASW do to engage more with people with lived experience? Because when we go back to the rights issue, and whether whether we've made people sufficiently resourceful to engage in their lives, if you engage with them, that is a rights thing. If to flourish, then you've got to value them, and these are processes that are being taken on board in this current survey. So I hope, Jerry, that answers the question you've asked me. Does it, or would you like me to?
I think that's a really helpful message for us for what we definitely need to do next.
Thank you very much. And I forgot to say happy birthday to BASW when I first spoke, but thank you.
I've just had a question come in as well around Black Lives Matter and what does that mean for social work. I mean, I can say something briefly about that, which is that BASW has put out a position statement around that from the Equality, Diversity and Inclusion advisory group. So I really encourage people to look at that, and there is obviously an awful lot more work that we need to do. Trisha, you talked at the start about how we need to be more political. I wondered if you wanted to add anything to that.
Yes, I do. I think, and it has been said many times before, but with the COVID pandemic and the clap for the NHS and the recognition that the NHS is doing, and yes, I'm going to go there, because outside the building that I work, there's a lovely sign painted on the pavement, and it's thank you to the NHS. But this building houses social workers and social care staff, and there's something about our image, there's something about our profession that we do not shout loud enough about the good work that we are also doing, and we don't seem to be owning the value that we have in making change, which is why I'm striving for us to be more politically active, to be activists, to really challenge, to really step to the forefront. And yes, we are doing that, but I don't know why our voices are not being heard as a collective. And the NHS, quite rightly, they have that publicity, but it does sadden me that my social workers, my staff, I am a social worker, but nobody's recognising the role that we play. We are social workers work in health service, they work across the whole of the sector, they work in voluntary sector. And we have been, throughout history, our profession has been at the forefront of the civil rights movement from the 60s to the present day. And I just see parallels with what's happening now and what happened in the 60s, where we were on those decision and policy makers and really being able to make change. And I'm not sure, I don't have the answer, but I'm not sure how we can be heard in that way again. Today is Windrush Day, and I think it's been similar, about 50 years since Windrush. And again, there's so much injustices. So, about 72 years. There's so much injustices that are happening there. And as a social work profession, we should be, I just want us to be louder. I'm not quite sure what else to say.
You're getting massive agreement on the chat about the need for us to be loud, visible, and out there. And people also saying, how can I get involved? Suggesting around organising more around the association, around the union. And I think that's really important message.
Thank you, Jerry, for linking that in with the social work union, because we have the pandemic that's attacking our respiratory systems. You have the issue with George Floyd in America, where he literally cannot breathe. We are all now, across the world, we are all holding our breaths from whether it's the pandemic, from whether it's the political situation, the systemic abuse and racism that's part of, we need to change the fabric of society. And it just seems that now is the right time. There's something different about what's going on in the world. And we social workers need to lead the way forward. That's what we do best.
Thank you, Trisha. We're coming near the end of the session. I just want to go back to Lemon and see if there's anything that you wanted to add to your wonderful words, and particularly around some of the things that you said people have picked up on each one, teach one, the hope that you talked about, the vision for the future.
Yeah, I what I would like is to get a video of this this whole session. I've really learned it, really enjoyed it, and I don't think I can wrap up everything actually and link everything together, except to say that I think that idea of a kind of unified voice for social workers being lifted into public consciousness to make change is a really good one. And it's one that I would certainly get behind. Yeah, no, I've just enjoyed it. I think somebody else might be able to wrap up better than I can. I apologise for that, but it's been very enjoyable, yeah.
Thanks so much. So we are going to go over to our weaver, Catrice, and hopefully you can help us make some sense of all the things that we've heard.
Can I just say something?
Yes,
I was
please.
really enjoying it, and I wasn't writing notes. Okay, that's the truth. I'm just outing myself. I should have written notes, but I was listening to it.
Lem, I wrote loads of notes, which is why my camera was closed down, because I thought it would be distracting if I was constantly like this. So, and this will be available, Lem. The video, the film will be available on the BASW website, on their training and CBD section under e-learning and webinars. So you can go on the BASW website and this will be available. And to all the other people out there who are asking about that. Gosh, how do you wrap that up? How do I pull that together, and how many threads are there? And for me, perhaps something that some of you may not know, which is interesting to know now, I think, is that as a child, I couldn't speak. I had a major problem with language, and I was classed as educationally subnormal because I had this.
Joins the meeting.
And when I got to the point after speech therapy where I could find my voice, I was so scared of speaking because I was the silent child that I swallowed my words. And I have learnt from swallowing so many words that the most toxic words are the ones we swallow, are the ones that we're scared of saying, because they poison us from the inside like an acid in your stomach. And we have been talking a lot about courage. And we've been talking a lot about what we need to do next, legislation. And for me, as I'm listening to what's being said, I almost want to say, just stop for a second, because there will always be something to do next and to do next and to do next. I know that. I want you to stop and I want you to look backwards. I want you to look at what you have done, what you have achieved, and how far not just social workers en masse have come, but how far you as an individual has come. We are often so busy looking at what we have to do that we forget what we have done. Realize that you have achieved vast things, incredible things, and you have made a difference to so many people's lives. As a child, I came from a family where my mom had quite bad, severe mental health problems. And my dad was involved in some stuff he shouldn't have been involved in. And we suffered in silence because we were scared the social worker would come and take us away. And for us, the social worker, this would have been about 1968, was like that kitty catcher from Chitty Chitty Bang Bang, the one with the big net who crept around in your nightmares. Da, da, da! Not the social worker, as we would say. Don't get them in. By the time my brother had reached 8, around 1978, and had major problems, we were in contact with social workers. And we realised that they were not the people from Chitty Chitty Bang Bang, the kitty catcher with the big net. For me, I have experienced firsthand at how the face of social work has changed, and how it still is a battle. It has changed, it has come on, and there is still stuff to do. And I am so impressed by what Trisha was saying with regards to shouting, and this analogy she made about the death of George Floyd, and he could not breathe, and the pandemic, and we cannot breathe. And this thing about, and you said, we are holding our breath. Do not hold your breath. Let it out as a scream, as a shout, so that people can hear the frustrations, because you didn't enter this job, I don't think, because it was good goddamn working hours and the pay was good. You entered this job because you were passionate about it, because it linked into your core values, because you wanted to change the goddamn world. And when you are put in a position where legislation shutters you and encloses you and barricades you until you cannot breathe, until you cannot live the life that you felt and you feel is vital, of course you're going to get frustrated. Of course you're going to think, should I still be in this work? Should I still be in this job? Am I worth anything? Am I doing what I should be doing? You bloody well are. You bloody well are. But there are forces that will push you down and make you challenge your own perception of yourself. There are people who want to tell your stories for you. Do not let them. Use your voice. We are talking about courage, and you can only be courageous if you're scared. I am not scared of standing in front of 400 people and performing. I am scared of driving. I'm really scared of driving. I've been in a couple of bad crashes. Every time I get in my car, I am incredibly brave, but you might think that's nothing. You might think I'm brave because I stand on stage. I am not. We need your voices. We need you to be brave and to lift up your voices. I know that Jerry was saying that we want more representation. We want your voice, your particular voice, your particular experience. Do not be scared of your voice. And if you are scared, what a wonderful, wonderful chance to be brave. What a wonderful chance. So please link into the next sessions. Let your voice be heard, and let us come together and create a force. I think Trisha again said, surf this wave of hope. Surf this wave of hope. For stories help us all to bind, and words, they help us all to find this thing that we call humankind. This thing that we call humankind. Please link in to the next session, and we look forward to seeing you all then. Thank you so much to all the panelists. Thank you for Lem's face, which is there on that screen in front of me, and his vital and passionate words. They say that in our brain, I know the triptych brain has been cancelled out, but we have our sensory cortex, we have our neocortex, and we have our reptilian brain. We have that fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. I would say that our passion is that sea of passion is that vital force, our reptilian brain. We've had that today. We've had passion. We have had that higher order thinking skills, the neocortex, the legislation, the history of social work, where we're going. And my God, we have had our sensory cortex stimulated. We have had those personal stories shared with us. We have had all parts of our brains massaged, and we have sailed on a sea of passion. I hope that you can board the ship during the next session, which is going to be at 5 o'clock. And I'm looking forward to hearing more stories and taking the stories that I've heard here and carrying them, bearing them with great humility to the next session. Thank you very much. Jerry, do you want to say a final word?
Just stay brave, everyone.
Yeah, stay brave.